Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we sift through the sources, extract the crucial nuggets, and give you the intellectual shortcut to becoming instantly well-informed.
Today, we are wading into a field that's, well, it's absolutely critical to the future of healthcare.
We're talking about the intersection of cutting-edge AI and human medical diagnosis, specifically these new generalist multimodal AIs.
Right. The big ones, the GPT-5s, the Gemini 2.5 Pros, all of them.
And they're becoming so accessible. I mean, they're being relied upon by everyone from experienced clinicians to, frankly, people at home Googling their symptoms.
And that wide accessibility, that's what demands this incredible level of scrutiny. For too long, the whole narrative around these systems has been driven by vendor claims of expert-level performance.
Right, you see that headline everywhere.
Exactly. But if you actually look at the evaluations, they almost always use these public, very structured data sets.
Things like Checkspert.
Yes. And those are great for measuring, common problems, common pathologies, but they just don't test the limits.
Exactly. Because real-world radiology isn't about classifying a really clear case of pneumonia.
Not at all.
It's about that subtle shadow, the complex, rare finding. The diagnostic needle in a haystack that only a true expert can spot.
In those challenging cases, that's where the risk of AI failure is highest. And it's also where human expertise is, well, indispensable.
So our deep dive today focuses on a study built specifically to test those limits. It's called the Radiology's Last Exam, or RadLE V1 benchmark.
And this was not another test of common findings. The researchers curated 50 expert-level spot diagnosis cases.
And that term spot diagnosis, that's key here, right?
It is. It means minimal context, minimal history. It requires that immediate, subtle visual recognition that separates a novice from a master. This was designed to be the hardest test possible.
We're looking at how 5 of the big frontier models, OpenAI o3, GPT-5, Gemini 2.5 Pro, Grok 4, and Claude Opus 4.1, how they did against board-certified radiologists and human trainees.
The mission was simple, really. Where do these generalist AIs currently fall on the human learning curve?
And the answer?
And the core finding, which is just essential context for this whole conversation, is that they fall significantly behind. This isn't about being close to human performance.
Right.
This is about performing consistently below the level of a human trainee. So we're going to unpack the hard data, but the takeaway is really clear. The gap is substantial, it's persistent, and it's clinically meaningful. Okay, let's unpack this and just look at how far behind they really are.
Let's start with those definitive numbers from the RadLE V1 benchmark, because the numbers themselves, they tell a pretty undeniable story. How did the gold standard, the humans, perform?
The board-certified radiologists, they really showed why they're the experts. They hit a mean diagnostic accuracy of 83% on this incredibly difficult set of cases.
83%, wow.
Which proves their ability to handle that complexity even under pressure. Now, the radiology trainees who are still developing that, visual intuition, they score 45%.
Okay, so that 45% from trainees, is that score surprisingly low, or does it actually confirm just how incredibly hard these RadLE cases are?
That's a really important point.
Because 45% is still a lot of expertise on very complex material.
It absolutely confirms the difficulty. This is not some easy multiple choice exam. This is high stakes, nuanced image interpretation. So that 45%, it represents the lower end of the human learning curve on complexity.
And that became the threshold.
And crucially, it became the threshold that the AI models just could not cross.
So let's look at the best the AI field has to offer. What was the top-performing AI model's score?
The best was GPT-5, and it achieved only 30% accuracy. Gemini 2.5 Pro was right behind it, almost identical at 29%.
30%.
I mean, to be clear, we're talking about the top AI performers getting 2 out of every 3 complex diagnoses wrong.
That is a staggering difference. 30% is way below the 45% from the human trainees.
It is.
And the drop-off for the other models is even more alarming.
Oh, it gets worse. OpenAI o3 managed 23%, Grok 4 stumbled down to 12%, and then Claude Opus 4.1 was functionally useless at 1% accuracy.
1%.
What really stands out here is just the stark contrast with all the previous headlines. Many studies on the structured exam questions, they showed AI statistically matching experts.
Right.
But when you take away the structure and you demand that subtle visual reasoning, when you demand they find a rare anomaly they haven't seen 1,000 times, the performance just collapses.
It really exposes the limitations.
Fundamentally, it shows the limitations of these generalist models when they're faced with ambiguity or rarity or complex visual integration.
So the benchmark itself is the key. It's not just that the AI isn't accurate, It's that it just cannot handle true complexity.
Exactly.
So let's dive deeper into that data. Did the type of scan make a difference? X-rays, detailed CTs, soft tissue MRIs. Did the AI show any strength in one area?
Well, the human hierarchy was completely consistent, but the AI did show some, let's say, preferences. Radiologists were superior everywhere, from 79% on CT up to an incredible 98% on MRI cases.
98%.
But funnily enough, the AI models actually did their best on those MRI cases. GPT-5 hit 45% accuracy on the MRI subset. That's its highest score.
45% on MRI. That's statistically matching the overall trainee score,
It is.
which might suggest that the visual complexities may be lower in some MRI structures compared to others.
Precisely. But then you have CT cases, which are inherently complex. You've got cross-sectional anatomy, density interpretation, and they made up almost half the data set.
And that was the hardest for the AI.
The hardest, yes. GPT-5 only got 22% accuracy there.
And if you break it down by clinical system, cardiothoracic, neuro, pediatric, whatever, the radiologists always had this huge lead, right?
At least a 50 percentage point margin over the best AI models in every single system they tested.
So the hierarchy holds.
The hierarchy holds no matter how you slice the data. GPT-5 and Gemini 2.5 Pro, they might swap places here and there as the leading AI, but the underlying order is fixed.
Experts first, trainees is second.
And the AI models lag significantly behind in third, across every specialty and every imaging type.
It's hard to ignore that 30% failure rate overall. But is there a simple fix? I mean, could we just tell the model to try harder?
Ah, right.
The researchers actually tested this. They ran an evaluation on GPT-5, tracking what they called reasoning effort, low, medium, and high. Logically, you'd think spending more computational time should lead to a better diagnosis.
You would think so. And the findings here are maybe the most concerning from a practical clinical deployment perspective.
Why?
The increase in accuracy was almost non-existent. Low effort gave them 25% accuracy, medium effort, also 25%, and high effort, it only got to 26% accuracy.
A single percentage point improvement, from the least effort to the most.
1 point.
That's negligible clinical benefit. What was the cost of that 1%?
The computational cost was massive, just a huge bottleneck. The response latency, how long the doctor or patient has to wait, it increased by over 6 times.
6 times.
Low effort took about 10.5 seconds. The high effort task dragged on for 65.6 seconds.
Wait, so you're talking about more than a minute just to process a single scan result, which would be a critical bottleneck in any busy clinic for basically zero clinical benefit.
That's right.
That delay would just completely derail trying to integrate these tools into a real workflow. It really suggests that the current state of AI reasoning is just an extremely expensive illusion.
That's the perfect way to frame it. The extra computation, it just doesn't translate into better visual interpretation, not on these complex cases. The time cost is huge, the accuracy gain is zero.
And then there's reliability. Because if you're going to base a treatment decision on an AI's input, that input has to be consistent. How reproducible were these results?
It varied dramatically. GPT-5 and OpenAI O3 showed what the researchers called substantial consistency. The ICC, the intra-class correlation coefficient, was around 0.61 to 0.64.
Which is okay.
It's okay. Gemini and Grok 4 were only moderate. But Claude Opus 4.1 showed poor reproducibility, with an ICC approaching 0.
So you have almost no gain from more thinking, but you have massive delays. And on top of that, wildly varied consistency.
Right.
If the model can't even give you the same answer twice on the same complex image, relying on it for a high-stakes diagnosis is just, it's unsafe.
Absolutely. It just confirms that the underlying mechanism that generates that chain of thought is unstable when it's dealing with these subtle cases.
So to really understand this failure, the researchers didn't just stop at the numbers. They did this brilliant qualitative analysis, creating a taxonomy of the visual reasoning errors.
Yeah.
They looked at the model's internal trace of how it got to its diagnosis. Let's dig into how these models are failing.
We can break the failures down, starting with the most basic one, perceptual errors. This is just the failure to accurately see or locate the finding in the first place.
Can you give us some examples of that?
Sure. The taxonomy includes underdetection, just missing a pathology that's clearly visible. For instance, in a classic ureterocele case, GPT-5 completely failed to identify the telltale ballooning of the ureter into the bladder.
Something a human would spot immediately.
Obvious to the human reader, so that's missing something that's right there.
Oh, what about the other way around? Seeing things that aren't there. That seems even riskier.
And that's overdetection or hallucination.
Yeah.
And it is arguably the most dangerous failure mode. In that same ureterosal case, GBC5 not only missed the actual pathology,
Right.
it then confidently reported multiple cysts with a spider-like pattern in the kidneys, which were totally normal, and then based on those phantom findings, it delivered the incorrect diagnosis of polycystic kidney disease.
That is not a small mistake.
Yeah.
That is confidently inventing a life-altering chronic disease diagnosis from thin air.
Exactly.
That detail alone should just stop any talk of autonomous adoption dead in its tracks.
Yeah.
You can't safely use a tool that's capable of manufacturing a complex illness.
You can't. And the last perceptual error is mislocalization. So it identifies the correct pattern, but puts it in the wrong place.
Okay.
For example, correctly seeing a cystic lesion, but placing it in the wrong part of the abdomen instead of precisely in the right atrium.
So let's move past perception to interpretive errors. This is where the model sees the finding, but then makes a mistake connecting that visual data to the right diagnosis.
Here we see two critical subtypes. First is misinterpretation. The feature is identified correctly, but the conclusion is just wrong.
Like what?
The model correctly saw clavicular elevation, but then incorrectly concluded the patient had a posterior shoulder dislocation when the image actually showed an acromioclavicular dislocation, a totally different injury.
And the second type. This is one that mirrors a pretty serious human failing. Incomplete reasoning. Or premature closure.
Yes, this is when the model just accepts its first impression too quickly. It doesn't consider the full differential diagnosis.
So it jumps to a conclusion.
In a case of a complex neurological disorder, Joubert syndrome, GPT-5 correctly saw there was pontine involvement, but it just stopped its reasoning there and diagnosed central pontine myelinolysis. It settled on a more common diagnosis and then explicitly stated, no further explanations needed.
Wow.
It completely missed the more subtle but correct underlying syndrome.
That arrogance of no further explanations needed, that's unsettling, whether it comes from a human or an algorithm. And finally, there were internal communication errors.
That's finding summary discordance. This is where the model identified the right pathology, but then contradicted itself in the final diagnosis.
How does that happen?
In one abnormal chest X-ray, GPT-5 correctly noted findings like a slender heart and hyperinflation in its internal trace, but then concluded with a final summary that it was a normal chest radiograph. The evidence and the conclusion were in direct conflict.
And on top of all these failures, the researchers saw human-like cognitive biases popping up in the AI's reasoning.
Yes, availability bias was really frequent. Because the models are trained on these huge data sets where common diagnoses just dominate, they default to those easy answers.
So they see what they expect to see.
Exactly. They were often diagnosing acute, common conditions like pneumonia or a pulmonary embolism instead of the rare findings that were actually there, like a pulmonary arteriovenous malformation.
So if you're a clinician using these tools, you're effectively fighting the model's internal biases. You're hoping it doesn't just default to the easy diagnosis it saw 10,000 times in training.
Instead of seeking that subtle life-saving rarity. Precisely. And they also saw framing effects.
Where the prompt itself biases the answer.
Yes. For instance, in a case of tarsal coalition, when the prompt asked for a single specific diagnosis, the model would pick one type of coalition and exclude another type that it had already correctly identified, just because the prompt demanded a single answer.
The qualitative analysis just makes it crystal clear. These generalist AI systems have fundamental catastrophic flaws in perception, reasoning, and consistency when they're faced with complex real-world data.
Our deep dive into the RadLE V1 results leaves us with a necessary crucial insight. These frontier generalist models are fundamentally unsuitable for autonomous or reliable use in complex diagnostic settings.
That 30% accuracy on hard cases compared to the 83% from radiologists just speaks volumes.
It shows the substantial development that is still required before you can even consider parity.
And this study has serious immediate safety implications for you, the listener, whether you're a patient or a practitioner.
Oh, absolutely.
We know that trainees and even patients are increasingly using these consumer-facing chatbots to interpret images, sharing sensitive scans, and getting back these potentially faulty but very confident diagnoses.
Like that polycystic kidney disease hallucination we talked about, This evidence is a strong caution against the widespread, unsupervised adoption of these tools.
And it really supports the need for regulatory frameworks that go beyond basic evaluations.
They have to.
Yeah.
Regulations must mandate evaluation on high-complexity cases, on benchmarks like RadLE, not just the common stuff in public data sets. If an AI can't handle the hard stuff, it absolutely shouldn't be trusted with patients' lives.
So the path forward isn't just about making the generalist models bigger or letting them reason for longer.
No. The evidence suggests the focus has to shift. It should be on creating specialized, finely tuned models designed specifically for radiology.
Where the primary goals are detecting subtle findings and meaningful clinical reasoning.
Right, rather than relying on these massive do-everything platforms. The fundamental problems are in their ability to integrate visual evidence into sound medical logic. It's a failure of reasoning, not just a failure of language.
And this brings us to our closing thought for you to mull over. When we look at 30% accuracy, coupled with the confident, life-altering hallucination of a non-existent disease, and you factor in that negligible 1% accuracy gain for a six-fold increase in cost when GPT-5 tried to think harder, we have to ask, are we building systems that actively discourage the human pursuit of subtle, life-saving rarities, or are we just funding an extremely expensive illusion of digital reasoning? Something to keep in mind as this technology continues its rapid entry into the medical field.